Ableton have officially announced and released the public beta for Live 12.3, and there are a bunch of new features in this update. So in this video, I want to go through the release notes to take you through every single one of them. If you're new here, my name's Matt. I'm an Ableton certified trainer and music educator, and I make tools and tutorials to help you master your music, find your sound, and create with confidence. Let's take a look at Live 12.3. Okay, so here I've got the release notes for the Live 12.3 B9 public beta. Obviously, it should be noted this is a beta, so it is subject to change with all these features. Maybe some additional things will be added, maybe some things will be changed, etc. But for now, we have 12.3 B9, which was released on September 2nd, 2025. If you want to have a look at the release notes for yourself, I'll leave a link in the description, but we're going to be going through them in this video, starting with stem separation, a much requested feature, which is pretty cool to see come here into Ableton Live 12. Live Suite now features a built-in stem separation that runs locally. It is important to note, of course, that this is Live Suite only, will not be working in other editions of Ableton Live, that separates a song into 4 stems: vocals, drums, bass, and other. You can separate songs from the browser or clips in the session or arrangement view, and all you need to do is right-click on that sample and then click Separate Stems to New Audio Tracks. And it is worth noting as well that there is a high-quality option, which you can add in the options.txt file, which I've done. Let's take a look at the quality of this stem separation. So here I've got the audio file for a song that I just released under my project Chronotect, which, little plug, you can check that out in the description, but here is a little bit of what it sounds like. I need a hero. And so all we need to do to separate this to stems is simply right click on the clip and come down to Separate Stems to New Audio Track, which is found under the Convert Harmony, Melody, and Drums in the right-click menu. So I'm not going to do this live because it can take a little bit of time, but I will click on this and you'll see here that we have options for vocals, drums, bass, and other. And if you've activated that little options.txt high quality, you can see this high quality and high speed slider down the bottom. Now, high quality does take significantly longer than high speed, which is why I've gone ahead and done this already. And we've got the high speed and high quality modes here. And if we unfold these audio tracks, we can see that it's basically done a pretty good job. They look fairly similar, although there are some bits here where we can see in this other section in the high speed where it hasn't picked up some things that the high quality mode has. But let's take a look at maybe say the vocals for the high speed option here. Someone to tear down all these walls, someone to rise above. Go to other. Bass. Maybe skip ahead to drums in the drop. So it does struggle a little bit with some of these more interesting or kind of hard to differentiate sounds, I guess, like a lot of bass music and stuff like that. And the drums, of course, do suffer from that transient smearing effect that a lot of AI stem separation has as a bit of a side effect. That's the high speed option, but let's take a look at the high quality mode. You can hear that in the vocals particularly, it's picked up some kind of more background vocals, which I think is great. And when I'm calling out the name, I don't need faith. Compared to the high speed option, which hasn't picked up those background vocals. And when I'm calling out the name, I don't need faith. I need a hero. Or at least as well, but you can hear it has picked up some of the guitar and stuff there, so it's not that perfect, but it has picked up some of the drums, a little bit less transient smeary. Particularly picked up things like the cymbals and stuff a little bit there better. And of course, this other track, which in the high speed mode has barely picked up anything. But much better in the high quality mode. So look, personally, this isn't a feature I'm going to find myself using a huge amount, but it is cool. It's a feature that a lot of people have been asking for. It's a feature that's been added to a lot of digital audio workstations recently. And of course, it does suffer from, you know, the kind of weird transient and kind of glitchy artifacty sound that a lot of stem separation comes with, but it is nice to have this as a feature. And of course, if you're working with far less complex stuff that I'm working with here, then I'm sure you'll get better results. But I do think it is worth turning on that high quality option. I do hope this is a mode that is kind of enabled by default and not something you have to turn on the options.txt, but only time will tell with that. Next up, we have a little bit of a controversial one, which is Splice Integration. So Splice, the industry's leading sample library, is now integrated into Live's browser. Anyone with a free or paid Splice account can access their library, browse, preview, and download samples from directly within Live. You can browse and save samples to your Splice library, as well as preview Splice samples in sync with Live Transport, which I think is pretty cool. And when you find a sample you like, you can drag it from the Splice label into the session or arrangement view. And once you start dragging, it's saved to the user library, which I think is a fantastic addition. And in addition to searching for samples, you can also have Splice find samples that would fit with existing material in your set, which I do think is a very cool feature. And let's take a bit of a look at the Splice integration. So if you go down in your browser to the Splice section in Places, which you'll now see, you can see that it just opens up a window in here. Now, when you first open this up, it'll just tell you to get started. There's a few extra prompts and stuff in there, but you'll see I'm not even logged in. I don't have a Splice account to log into, but it still lets me go through and browse all of the free samples, which I think is pretty cool. So I could go ahead and find some drums, for instance. Let's go ahead and preview something. And you'll notice just how instantaneous this actually is, which I think is fantastic. They really haven't compromised on the speed and workflow here. Some sample services can be slow sometimes to kind of load and stream the samples. Now, in order to add this to your set, you will need to go ahead and actually log into Splice. So let me go ahead and do that now. And then once you've logged in, all you need to do to add a sound to your live set is simply click and drag it, and then it will get added as an audio file. Pretty quick and instantaneous. And it is also worth noting that all the preview of sounds and stuff here can be synced to the live set. If I find a drum loop, it will time stretch that loop to the tempo of our session. So currently we're set at 120 BPM. Let's change this to say 140. And you'll see that if we've changed this to 140, that drum loop is now going to play at a different tempo. We can preview it at different time stretching, so at 2 times or half times, which I think is pretty cool, where we can turn that off entirely. And of course, the other cool aspect is being able to search by sounds. So I've gone ahead and created a little bit of a loop here, just with 3 Splice loops that I just found. And if I want to find a loop on Splice that is kind of complementary to this, all I need to do is select this area and just click on this search with sound option in the Splice section in the browser. That's going to process my selection. We can take a listen to what it's taken as the reference. And then it's going to give us a few files down here that it thinks are kind of complementary to what we've fed it. Now, of course, because I don't currently have a Splice subscription, I'm not able to pull this in, but I can say that what it also has done is analyzed the key of what we've pulled in here. You can see it's kind of pulled this in apparently as like F something. But then when you pull in the file from Splice, it will actually adjust the pitch control of the clip to make it match the loop that you fed it or the sounds that you fed it, which is pretty cool. Now, of course, if you don't have a Splice account, you don't care about using Splice at all, you can just turn this option off. If you go to your preferences or your settings, come down to library, there is an option for show Splice. I can just turn that off, and now Splice will be removed as an option in my places, and you don't have to worry about it at all, which I know is pretty useful for some of you. I'm not going to get into talking about whether or not Splice is good in this video, but safe to say it is something you can either turn on or off depending on whether or not you would like to use it. Up next, we have an update to the Auto Pan device, or rather it's actually kind of an entirely new device called Auto Pan-Tremolo, which is a very kind of cool overhaul of a device that I use somewhat, but I think I'll probably use a little bit more now due to these features. So Auto Pan now features an updated interface. It's also called Auto Pan-Tremolo, as we can see here, being renamed to Auto Pan-Tremolo. So we now have 2 modes, panning and tremolo mode. Panning modulates the placement of the source sound in the stereo panorama, while tremolo modulates the signal level. There's a real-time visualization, which is quite cool, and some new LFO time modes, as well as a modulation attack parameter, which is pretty cool. I'll show you in a second, and then a frequency modulation parameter as well. The tremolo mode also offers some pretty cool things. It is a single LFO waveform with a shape control, which we'll show in a second, and also has this harmonic mode and a vintage mode, both of which are pretty interesting and cool. Let's take a look at them now. Okay, so I've got the Auto Pan-Tremolo device loaded up on this loop here, and by default, we can see it's a much nicer visualization compared to the old Auto Pan, which is still available as a legacy device, which looks like this. If you recall, I think this is my default one here, but it looks a little bit different to the Auto Pan-Tremolo device. Let's turn off the old one. And we of course have this amount control here, which allows us to adjust the intensity of the panning effect, the frequency or the speed, which can go all the way up to 60 Hertz, which is pretty nice. The shape control, which applies some kind of modulation or shaping to the chosen waveform, which we can see we have quite a few more options here compared to the original Auto Pan, which only had 4. We now have sine, triangle, this kind of shark toothy one, which is kind of interesting. Saw up, saw down. Square, which doesn't actually do anything with the shape control. And we have 3 different noise options, one kind of more sharp edged one more smooth one, and one kind of sample and hold option, which are all really cool. Now, before I get into the tremolo mode, I want to talk about some of the other cool features here. So I'm going to switch this back to the sine mode, and we can see we have this rate option here. So currently that's just in Hertz. We also have the ability to have this set to time, so all the way from 100 milliseconds up to 200 seconds, which is actually kind of ridiculous, to be honest. We have synced, so obviously synced to our tempo. We have triplets, so we can work just in triplets. And then we have dotted notes. Or we can have it set in the number of 16th notes, so 1 all the way up to 64 16th notes. And I really like this visualization here between the left and the right to really tell you exactly where that sound is positioned in the stereo spectrum and at a given moment in time. But we also have this option here to invert the LFO polarity, so we can have it switched around, which was of course there in the original Auto Pan. We also have a phase offset control, which again was there in the original Auto Pan, which does only work though, I believe, in the synced options. So not in the rate or time, only works in the synced, triplet, dotted, or 16th options. But the thing I do want to talk about is this little option here, which is this stereo mode, which by default is set in phase. So we can adjust the offset of the phase between the left and right speakers. Which can create some cool effects. But if we click on this little polarity symbol here, we can switch this to spin, which detunes the left and the right LFOs and gets a really cool effect. And if we set this to rate, you get some really cool effects with this particular mode, and you can see visually exactly what that's doing there just by detuning these different LFOs in the left and right side. And of course we can invert that as well. It's a really, really cool effect. And then we have these 2 options down here, which do also work in the tremolo mode. And in fact, I'm going to talk about them in context of the tremolo mode because I think it's a little bit easier to understand what they're doing there. So let's switch to the tremolo mode, which basically is just an amplitude adjustment rather than left and right. We obviously have the ability to control the shape here. At 50%, we have this triangle wave. Down at 100% or negative 100, we have kind of like a slewed sawtooth wave. And then we go all the way up to like a square wave, which is pretty nice. But let's take a look here at these 2 options, this attack mod, which basically gives us some attack time on the tremolo. And what this is doing is adding a fade in based on when the Auto Pan-Tremolo device detects an onset. So you can hear the kind of movement of the LFO there is fading in, which is pretty cool. And then I really like this dynamic frequency modulation option. Let's pull this attack all the way down. Basically what this option does is adjusts the rate of the modulation based on how loud the incoming signal is. So you can hear there that when those plucks occur, we have a much faster rate. And then over the course of time, as that sound dies down a little bit, the rate slows down, which is a really cool feature. And if we pull this the other way, it of course goes negative. So louder sounds have a slower rate versus the softer sounds, which have a faster rate. So this is a really cool feature, but we're not done quite yet. We have two more options here, which is this harmonic tremolo mode and this vintage tremolo mode. So this vintage tremolo mode basically introduces some saturation as the sound kind of increases and decreases in volume based with the tremolo. Which is a really nice touch. And then this harmonic tremolo mode is really interesting in that instead of increasing or decreasing the amplitude across the whole sound, we basically have this back and forth between low frequencies and high frequencies at a set 600 Hertz crossover. So it's almost like we get this kind of filter sweeping bandpass effect, which is pretty cool, actually. Now up next, something that a lot of people have been asking for since we had bounce in place or bounce to new track, we now have the ability to bounce group tracks, of course. So it's now possible to bounce group tracks via two new commands, bounce group to new track and bounce group in place. The bounce to new track command is available in the context menu, which is pretty neat. And of course, we can just create a selection and bounce that selection as well. Now, it is worth noting that the group track is bounced with all its processing, including any return tracks used via sends from the group track or any of its included tracks, which is different to just bouncing a single track, which does not include the return tracks in it. So let's take a quick look at this. For example, if we unsolo or solo this whole group, and if I go ahead and actually just send, say, this percussion loop here to the reverb, and I just select this area, I can right click and I can bounce group to new track, or I can bounce group in place. Let's go ahead and bounce it to a new track. And now we have this group bounce to a new track, the audio of it, let's pull it down a little bit, and we can hear the reverb is also there embedded in this track, which is super nice. And it of course does mute any of the clips in the original group as well. So we can go ahead and unmute those if we'd like. You can also of course bounce the group in place. So we can just simply right click on the group track and click on bounce group in place. And that will bounce the entire arrangement, effectively freezing and flattening the group track. Now we don't have the ability to freeze groups, which I think is a little bit strange. I would have liked the ability to also freeze groups as well as just bounce them. But this is obviously a really fantastic step, particularly for people who like to resample things like I do a lot. So let's undo that and take a look at another new bouncing option, which I think is probably one of my favorite features of this update. And that is pasting bounced audio. So not only is it possible to just bounce the audio from a track, but of course, if we're bouncing the audio, it does mute the original clips. Pasting bounced audio allows us to copy a selection, an area. This works on either individual tracks or on group tracks, and then paste the bounced audio as opposed to pasting the clip. So it's now possible to paste bounced audio from copied material. To do this, first copy a clip or clip time selection from a MIDI audio or group track, and then in an audio track, use the paste bounced audio command from the track's context menu, or you can use the keyboard command, which on Mac is Command Option V, and I believe on Windows probably Control Alt V or something like that. Basically, I can select, say, this area, I can right click and I can come to copy. And then if I come to an audio track, say down here, I can just right click and click on paste bounced audio, or use Option Command V as the keyboard command. And that is going to paste the bounced audio at my cursor without doing anything to the original selection. Now that was of course a group. I could do the same thing just with, I don't know, this synth line here, right click, copy, come down here, right click, paste bounced audio, and that has just pasted the synth, which is pretty cool. Interesting, it looks like it's taken the track volume there and added that as some automation. That's an interesting kind of approach, but that is something worth noting too. And I believe it probably, if I had some send automation on this too, let's just double check, right click, copy, and pasted this here as the bounced audio, it does also add the automation for the send value for that point in time. So track volume and send values when you're working with pasting just individual or clips from individual tracks rather than across groups kind of get copied to the track options. But if you're pasting bounces from groups, then of course that stuff gets embedded into the group and you don't need to worry about that just kind of pulls over in the audio files. Now, it is worth noting here that the source material will be bounced in its current state at the time paste bounced audio is used, meaning you can modify the material and use the command again to create variations, which I think is very cool. For example, we could go here, copy this whole group, right click and copy. And then I could paste this here, paste the bounced audio, and then I could go ahead and adjust, say, the amount of this auto pan and maybe adjust some of the levels here. And then I could do the same thing again, right click and paste bounced audio, and that will take the bounce from that selection again and then paste it there. So you can really quickly create variations. And of course, if you're using keyboard commands rather than the right click menu, you can get this really quickly and efficient, and it's a super great workflow. So kind of the last highlight feature of 12.3 here is device A/B comparison, which I actually think is a really neat update and new feature. It's not something that I saw a lot of people asking for, but I think it is really useful. So basically, we effectively have every single stock device now having two different versions, an A and a B version. And this has been added as an option to the context menu when you right click on a device, and we can use the compare switch A to B to toggle the difference between the two different device states. Each state can have its own set of unique parameter values. For example, use state A to tweak values while leaving state B at the device's default settings, which is pretty cool. And we can also copy from A to B and from B to A as well. So let's take a quick look at this. As an example, let's go back here to this synth sound. And using this Auto Pan-Tremolo device, let's right click on this and click on switch to B. The keyboard shortcut for which is P. And of course, if you have the MIDI keyboard or computer MIDI keyboard enabled, you can use Shift P instead. So let's use Shift P on our keyboard. And we can see now we've got Auto Pan-Tremolo B instead of Auto Pan-Tremolo. And so now I can go ahead and adjust some parameters. And then I can switch back and forth between these different device states just with the P key. Let's turn off the delay there so that kind of stops. And this works for all stock devices. I'm not sure if it works on synths, actually. Let me check that really quickly. It also works on synths, which is actually pretty cool. So you can kind of create one sound in the synth, and then you can go ahead and compare that or switch that to a different preset or a different state rather, and switch back and forth between the two states. That's actually a pretty cool feature. So any stock device, whether it's an instrument, an audio effect, or a MIDI effect, has this feature, compare switching to B and switching to A as well. And then of course, we also have the ability to copy A to B, so that then we can go ahead, switch to B, and maybe make some very slight adjustments so we can kind of compare the two different versions of the device. Now, of course, this is often more useful when doing things like, say, EQ movements or comparing compressor settings, things in a mixing context, but you could also use it in like a sound design context if you're resampling and want to quickly switch between two different versions or states of an effect or something like that. This could be a really great way to do that. It's not an automatable option, right? So you can't kind of do it in the context of a whole song, but it is something you could do, say, in a sound design context, which is a pretty cool feature indeed. And there are a slew of other features and improvements. For example, in arrangement view, MIDI notes where the note start is not part of the arrangement will not be drawn since they should not be played. So just a little bit of a visual update there. And the browser does feature a bunch of new icons, which I think is pretty cool. I might chuck up like some kind of visual on the screen to show the old icons versus the new icons in the 12.3 browser. But safe to say, there are a lot of updates visually in the browser to help distinguish and differentiate between the different types of devices or samples or sounds or plugins, etc., used in the browser. There's also the option here for when the browser is in focus, it's now possible to show or hide the filter view and tag editor with the following shortcuts, Control-Shift-F or Command-Shift-F. Now, it's not written here, but I do believe that this now means that the Show Similar Files keyboard shortcut has changed. So if we go back to the browser and, for instance, go to All here, and we can find this particular sound. If I now press Command-Shift and F in the browser, that will show or hide the filters section, which is pretty neat. And then Command-Shift and E will quick show or hide the tag editor, which is super useful to have a keyboard shortcut for that. But now we can see here that if I hover over Show Similar Files, it does say Command-Shift and F as the keyboard shortcut down in the bottom, which we of course know is no longer the case. So I believe that's now Alt-F instead, or Option F is now showing similar files. I don't know why that's not there in the release notes. Please, for the love of God, Ableton, stop changing keyboard shortcuts. That's all I'm gonna say. There's also the ability to adjust some things with quick tags, which I think is pretty cool. There's of course some new stuff in the core library, and the interface has been adjusted a little bit, which I think is actually really cool. This first one, we have the ability to have a smaller mixer height. So if we go to our mixer, say in the session view, this used to be kind of our minimum mixer height here. I could now go ahead and just make this really, really, really small. Which is actually pretty neat, particularly if you're working in the split view here and say we, wanted to show less of our mixer volume, we could make that a little bit smaller. And if you're working on a small screen or highly zoomed in, you get a little bit more screen real estate now instead of having to have it kind of all the way up here. You obviously lose access to the panning of the track, but most of the time that's not a huge issue if you're having a mixer this small anyway. There's some updates to Max for Live, there's some updates to performance, and there's additional setup options as well as a bunch of bug fixes. So if you were having any bug issues that haven't been fixed or addressed in kind of recent updates, do come and double check here. There's not a huge number of bug fixes, but it is worth noting that there are some there, so come and check. But really, that is the kind of main core updates here in the 12.3 beta 9. Now there are some more updates that aren't mentioned in these beta release notes. For example, there's an update to the Expressive Chords device, which I'll just show really quickly. So if you were using the Expressive Chords device, which is pretty cool, which allows you to have custom chord sets per note. Previously, adjusting the chords in the device was a little bit finicky because you'd have to kind of go to this option and then import the chords from clips. But now there's an option in an updated version of Expressive Chords to actually draw in the notes manually. We have this edit mode, and you can basically hold down any notes, say on your Community MIDI keyboard or something like that, and then learn that chord to a pad. Click on Learn. We can go ahead here, change that chord to that. So we can learn that, then we can go to the next one, click on Learn, play a different chord. And so it's just really nice to have this ability in here to be able to kind of learn chords through MIDI input rather than having to send a clip into the device or import the chords as a clip. So that's a really nice update to the Expressive Chords device if you do use that. And beyond that, I'm sure there's some other little minor updates here and there in the software, but I do just want to take a really brief moment to talk about some of the updates to Push 3 as well. Now the updates to Push 3 really could be a video in and of themselves, but I just want to go through them really briefly. First, we have this really cool XYZ or XYZ Control option here, which basically gives you the ability to control an audio effect, an instrument rack, or a drum rack using Push's expressive pads on a kind of XYZ layout. Now, if you're used to using like a chaos pad or something, it's a very similar kind of concept where you have the entirety of the Push's interface or pad layout, which is an XY pad with also a kind of pressure sensitivity, which is just an on-off pressure. It's not a full pressure sensitivity, which allows you to control parameters attached to a rack. It's very cool. If you have a Push 3, I highly recommend trying it out. We also now have this rhythm generator enabled in drum racks, which actually uses the rhythm generator MIDI tool or the rhythm MIDI tool on Push 3 in the drum rack or drum rack mode, which is a good step in the right direction towards having full kind of MIDI tool support directly on Push 3. There's also touch sensitive step editing, which is very cool, which basically allows you to input the velocity of a note in a step sequence based on the slide position on that pad. There's stem separation, of course, on Push 3, and probably one of the most requested things, there is external audio interface support in standalone mode. You can now plug in any class compliant USB audio interface directly into Push 3 in standalone mode and use it as an audio interface instead of having to use the ADAT functionality on Push 3 directly. There's also a few bug fixes, but that basically covers everything new in the live 12.3 beta 9 update released on the 2nd of September 2025. Let me know what your favorite features for this update are in the comments, what you think of it, what you think could be added, improved, if you like it, if you don't. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. Stay awesome, and I'll see you all in the next video.